everybody, Randy Patterson here with Boomerocity, and I've got another fun interview for you this episode. It is with Derek Shulman. Derek Shulman, along with his brothers, formed a band way back when called Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, and they went on to then form what was referred to as a prog rock band called Gentle Giant. And Derek then went on to get into went to the dark side, as they called it, and became a record company exec with several different companies. And in one of those positions, he signed a little band called Bon Jovi. And there were other bands he worked with, like some other alphabet thing called like AC/DC. Maybe you've heard of them. But his story is absolutely fascinating. I mean, very involved with people like the boys in Black Sabbath. He and Ozzy were good friends. Terry Reid and even Elton John was in their orbit for quite a while, way back in the early days. And for me to say that this book is a page turner would be an understatement. Those who know me know I'm a bit of a business geek. So to read both about music and about the music business, the business side of it, man, it just come together and make my form of porn, if you will. So I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I think you will too. I encourage you to go ahead and order it. As I record this, it'll be about a month before it comes out, but you can pre-order it wherever you like to buy your books and pre-order them from. I think it would be a great book for your library, as well as holiday gifts for friends. We've got the holidays coming up. Be a great addition to their library too. So why don't you go ahead and order a couple copies of it? While you're at it, would you go ahead and hit like, and if you're not a subscriber, would you become a subscriber? I'm not going to charge you for it, but it sure helps us out a lot. And would you share this interview and our channel with your friends who you think might enjoy these kinds of interviews that you see here on this YouTube channel, and whatever other channel or podcast platform you're watching or listening to this on. So without any further ado, here is my first, and I think there might be another interview or two in the year or two to come, and you'll hear why as you listen to this, but my first interview with the amazing Derek Shulman. Until next time, this is Randy Patterson with Boomerocity. Take care. Hello, Derek.
Hi, Dean. How are you?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Thanks very much.
Right. Where are you clicking in from?
Manhattan, New York City here. Manhattan. Where are you?
To quote the Beatles, I'm in the Smoky Mountains way down south. So I'm in Sevierville, Tennessee.
Oh, great. I love that part of the world. I haven't been there for such a long time. I love the area. It's beautiful.
Oh, it is beautiful. I'm my dad's caregiver. I live next door to him, and he has Alzheimer's, and so I'm fortunate that I get to have this time with him. And so when I'm not taking care of him, I'm doing stuff like this, and so far it's working out pretty well. So I'm cherishing the moments.
That's great. I mean, I like your background there, by the way.
I was hoping you might, and I was also hoping you weren't missing too many of the book covers that I stole to make this happen. So,
okay, I was going to ask, how the hell do you do that? That's
it's all virtual. I'll be happy to give it to you if you'd like, and use it for others all you want. It'd be my pleasure. But well, man, thank you for joining me on this. It's a big deal to me, and it might be for reasons you might not expect, because growing up, I mean, the Gentle Giants and your recording work was a little probably right just as I was getting into other rock and roll. So, my mom raised me on Elvis. That was the first concert I went to, and my first interview was when I was 14. I happened to meet the Colonel and got to ask him a few questions. I say that's my first celebrity interview, but
itself.
It was fun. Yeah, it was an experience, but as you might imagine, but just reading your story. I'm a business geek too. My degrees are in finance for whatever that's worth. And just reading your business background in addition to the music, when you put the music and business together, to me, that's kind of like my porn. I really enjoy reading all that. So your book was exceptionally or especially interesting to me. I couldn't stop reading it
I,
for all of that. So, and I'll mention something else very quickly. When I put out on my personal social media that I was going to be interviewing you, it was really, I wrote it down here. I want to pull it up. But one of my classmates, he responded to my post and he said, "I remember the album cover of the balding grinning man. My older brother Lars had that album, and I happen to know this guy fairly well, and he lost that brother a few years ago. And so I know that just seeing the story that you and I are going to be talking together brought back some good memories as he still kind of processes through his grief there. And
right.
I know you know how that feels, having lost your brothers and such.
I,
So anyway, I just thought I'd share that up front here because it's a little bit different angle of this book that I want to approach on. So, um, and I'll probably be a little scattered on this too, Derek.
wherever you go, wherever you go, I'll follow you.
So first of all, this book is very, very well written, man. I mean, how you articulated things and how meticulous you were. I could tell you really dug deep on this. Was that difficult? Was that cathartic? Was that painful to do?
Well, some of it was painful to, but I felt that just talking about my music and the music business was was interesting, but not enough for a real, I guess, deep down interesting story. So I wanted to integrate my personal traumas, if you like, and grief, as you mentioned, as well as other things which are much happier, like my family and how siblings work together, the whole kit and caboodle of what life is about. I mean, my life was about music, but not just music. It was about how one lives one's life, having, losses and family and all the other stuff that goes on every day for everyone here. Not
Yep.
just a music guy.
Well, one thing that intrigued me about your story, and I couldn't help but remember other stories that I've heard where, I mean, you guys, it was a rough upbringing for you. Money was scarce and it was a tough thing there. And you mentioned being Jewish and being in an area where that wasn't necessarily the best situation to be in over in the UK and such. And it reminded me of the new documentary that Billy Joel has out. I was been a big fan of his, but I didn't realize some of the things he had to deal with and some of the horror that his family had to deal with before they came to the States. And so your story in that regards was resonated with me. What is it do you think makes dire circumstances, poverty, such a common thread in the music scene? I mean, we hear so much about it, especially in classic rock. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that it probably is a combination, certainly in England, or I was born in Scotland, of course, but I was raised in the south of England. And I think at that time, I was born in the late 40s, as you probably see. But during the 50s, um, there was a real, and there still is, but not like it is today, like it was then, a class system. And really, the class system was very, very integrated in society. So there was a class system of the upper class, which is about 10%. There was no middle class, maybe 5% middle class, and all the rest of the people were lower class. And for the most part, everyone left school at age 14. And basically you were left to your own devices to be a plumber or a grave digger or whatever. And I think that to make it in certain respects in that world, you either had to be a football player, a soccer player, or a rock and roll musician to make it to make any kind of dent because there was no other outlet for you, and unless unless you got very very lucky, and that's probably true in a lot of fashion. I mean, growing up in England, it was probably very different. I know it was very different in the States, but in England it was very much. If you didn't, for I mean, you've seen Ozzy and Black Sabbath, they were working in factories. That's what their destiny was, unless they decided to pick up instruments and become a rock and roll band. And I think
Hmm.
part of that was what I did, but part of that was the other part, of course, was that I grew up in an incredibly musical household, so I had that going for me.
Wow. And I mean, your dad was a jazz player, is that correct?
Yeah, he
Yep.
was a jazz trumpeter and a band leader, and music was always around the house. That's something I can't tell you how important that was for myself and my siblings because we all felt that music was part of us, and it was part of our household. Yeah,
Hmm.
so.
And bringing bright spots into your life too, when everything else could be kind of dark, I would imagine, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, music was was around all the time. And when you're talking about um, uh, being an outsider, if you like, being Jewish in a society which wasn't, and also being poor. And I'll say that because poverty is there is shame in poverty, especially. I was lucky enough uh, to get I was lucky enough to go to a grammar school in England at that point. At 11 years old, you were streamed and you had this exam. And if you passed this exam, you got a scholarship to a grammar school. And I passed the exam and got a scholarship to a grammar school, which is all boys, and the teachers wore cloaks and mortarboards, and it was very, very strict. It was really like hardcore. But so I was in two ways, kind of an outsider, both being Jewish in a school of 2,003 kids were Jewish. And the other side was that most of the kids who went to this school were pretty well off. And my household really was very not very well off to say the least.
As you say that, it just struck with me, it probably should have hit me while I was reading the book. That that would explain a lot of, among other things, how and why your brothers kind of clicked so well together. You had the musical family, you had that all kind of going on in the background, and then just pretty much sounds like you're pretty much having, you guys were your own social network and your own, you had to click well together, and you were able to be much more intuitive with each other, especially as you started getting into the music. Is that a
Yeah,
fair observation?
absolutely. A very, very good observation. Our family, I mean, again, I had four siblings. My elder sister, my elder brother. I was the middle one, which is the post-war kid, and I had two younger brothers. Yeah, it was really we were a family, a real family. And even though my dad was a professional musician and out every night, but he was also a great father. I mean, he was incredibly loving. I was lucky that we had a loving family as well as a musical family. So again, these things are part and parcel of who you become when you get older. And you realize, you realize other people didn't have certain things that you had or had things that you didn't have. That's why it's good to reflect back, as I've done in the book, and realize that you ask why. I mean, yeah, I was an outsider, so I had to make my space and place in the world as an outsider, and I think those things I just mentioned are part of why and how I did what I did. Also, just freeing myself from poverty. That's um, another driver, if you like. I mean,
Hmm.
there are all sorts of reasons why you become who you are. Um, the trauma of my father dying in my arms and my brother's arms, that led to a lot of I guess anxiety over my life, health anxiety,
Mhm.
which I still deal with. I mean, being honest here. But
Yeah.
these are things that we all deal with in different ways. What you are subjected to as a teenager, if you like, or a younger person.
It seems like when kids have to experience the trauma of the death of a loved one, especially a parent or a sibling, that does have lifelong effects that never seem to lift off of that individual. I know a lot of personal examples, and I'm curious for you how your father's passing in the way it did. And I remember you articulated it so well, and you're very eloquent on it. How did that affect you in your creation of the music, you and your brothers, in the creation of the music in both bands, as well as your career after that in the record business?
Well, he was a musician and a musician's musician. I mean, he was able to literally pick up any instrument and within 5 or 10 minutes master it like a maestro. And thankfully, his DNA trickled down to his kids. So again, my siblings, we all had that. Thankfully, that ability to pick up an instrument and be pretty good at it. But certainly, the trauma affected us. I had therapy and realized that my health anxieties, if you like, were down to what happened when I was 16 or 15 and what happened. And that resonated through my life. But it was the same thing for my siblings. We all, I know this for a fact, we all were um, concerned that we wouldn't live past the age of 50, which is how old my father was when he died. Uh,
Wow.
but what he left behind was something that, as you said, was a family who were incredibly close. Yes, there were rivalry. Yes, there were arguments. Yes, there were lots of things that went on. But we were family, and nothing could get in the way of that.
How did your the scarcity of your upbringing, as far as material things, money, and then the passing of your father and your health anxieties, how'd that affect you? I'm not asking for a big expose here because I value people's privacy, but how'd that affect you in how you conducted business and how you raised your family?
Well, I put my blinkers on and said, "Okay, this is a world that I've got to decide how to um, manipulate through whatever it is, and and do what I had to do musically. That was most importantly. And music was so important to me. It always was, and it still is. And be a musician and make my life in music. But at the same time, um, I just wanted to be sure that uh, I could raise my family in a comfortable way and not worry about having bread on the table at night or whatever. So yeah, all of these things contributed to I guess, putting my blinkers on and said, okay, I'm going to focus all of my energies, internal energies, external energies, to be hopefully the best that I can be. And sometimes, it, it affect you get to the point where you've done too much and overstressed yourself, which happened a couple of times. But look, it's part of who you are, and so that's been my life from that day on. And then, so when I was in the group, I wanted to make sure that the group was the best they could be, no matter who we were working with. So we tried to get the best musicians in, certainly Simon Dupree, and then of course Gentle Giant. It was not just me. Thankfully, the other guys in the band were the same way. We wanted to be as best as we could be together. But the focus was always, trying to be as best you could be in both the music and ultimately business that you mentioned as well.
Hmm. One thing I picked up on was that you seem to have a lot of good recall of details from, I mean, let's face it, you covered several decades of personal history there, your career and all that. Did you keep diaries and journals and such that helped you with this, or how were you able to pull all that together? Because I know how it is for me. You know how I do things. I think I'm going to remember things. I make a couple notes, but then if I'm going to go back and if I was going to write my life story, I'd be hard pressed to be as detailed as you are in your book.
No, no, I never had diaries or little phone vignettes or whatever. No, I found it very easy to remember the details you see in the book. And what's in the book are just a few of them. I mean, if I a lot of people are saying I should do a follow-up because there are so many stories and interesting facts that perhaps would be still um, interesting for people not just in the music business. But no, I remembered a lot of the situations that I got myself into, if you like, as a musician, and then as someone who was an executive in the business side. So no, I didn't. They all came to me. In fact, my elder brother Phil, who just had his 88th birthday, he's the only sibling left that I have.
Wow.
He has an incredible memory. I mean, he has a memory that's even way better than mine. He remembers little details of when we were on, my first group and knocking it, just things that I said, oh yeah, just like things that I had some recall of, but nothing like his. So we had pretty good, you know, musical memories, but also regular memories too, thankfully.
Is he going to write a book saying this is how that really went down?
That's what I'm concerned about. I did give the book to him first. I have to tell you, I had to make sure that he saw it first because there was a lot of rivalry with me and Phil, and
Yeah.
ultimately he had to leave the band. Um, Partly because of the rivalry, but partly because he had a tough time being the only one married and 10 years older than the rest of the band. So it was tough for him. But and we didn't speak for a few years because he kind of left us in the lurch. But ultimately the ice broke and we speak to each other every week, and I see him, whenever I'm in the UK, and
Mhm.
thankfully he is in you know he's in great shape for his age.
Yeah. Well, he's a year younger than my dad, so that's
Okay.
remarkable. But one thing, that's something else in the book. You mentioned his story. You and him both. I mean, he married, a bit of time ahead of you, but it seems like you guys were very good about keeping your noses clean while you were in this business. And it's not your typical rock and roll story of a lot of debauchery and you know, substance abuse of various kinds and such. And you guys seem to do a pretty good job of that. And then in your case, in both of your cases, you found mates who, became lifelong partners for you. And that's a rarity in this business. So, what do you attribute that success to for both you and your brother?
Well, that's two brothers. I mean, both my brothers. Uh, Again, I'll harken back to my father. My father was a tremendous personality, an incredible musician, a loving man, but also smoked 60 cigarettes a day, was a drinker, he'd go out and get pints of beer, and he would get was never drunk, but certainly was a drinker and imbibing, and he put his hands in the biscuit jar occasionally, which my mother didn't particularly like, and go out with his friends and come back to the house a little tipsy. And we saw that, but when we saw what the outcome was, and that day of when he passed away, I think we all, literally every one of us, I think at that time, my brother Phil and my sister Eve were smokers. We all stopped smoking. I didn't smoke at all, and I've never imbibed in anything, you know. But I think that was it. I think that was the point of your realization that something that outside of your own body can affect you, your ability to think, ability to be healthy, etc. So I think that that was part of the reason. Also, seeing other musicians believe that they're doing or being something a little more than they were, and just and seeing what a mess it made of their lives. It was nothing that I was interested in, and nothing we were interested in. And also, just as a point of reference, you made a good point. The interesting thing, and I just realized this when you said that, is the Gentle Giant guys, all of us. We've had partners. I've had my wife. We've been married 48 years. Every one of us have had lifelong one partner, from day one. So Kerry, the keyboard player, his wife, they've been married, I think 48 years, 49 years. Gary, it's the same thing, even longer, 50 years. John, even longer, 52 years. And my brother Phil, 60 odd years. It's very interesting. That usually you'll see, as you said, that most musicians have gone through several partners of God knows what. I don't know what it is. It's commitment,
Yeah.
commitment, commitment to life, commitment to love, and commitment to being honest and open with your partner, and not
Well,
and not doing stuff that you really should not be doing as
right.
a family.
Well, no, for me personally, I mean, I was in the high tech business for over 20 years. You go to a business meeting and a business gathering where there's going to be drinking and such. And I mean, I never imbibed that there was alcoholism on both sides of my family. And before I even knew what DNA was, I thought, man, I don't want to tempt myself with that stuff. I see what happened to family members with it. And so, but there is that social pressure in business, whether you're in a band or you're a record exec, to partake of various vices, whether chemical, liquid, or physical, and for you to be able to stand strong in all that, I can relate to what you're talking about there. That's not an easy, well, yeah, it can be easy because you do see what it could do to people. And that, did you get ridiculed for any of that?
Well, look, I thought about that, of course, but no, it's a great thing to be able to say no, and 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 the peer pressure, if you like. I never, yeah, of course there's peer pressure, but I didn't get swayed by that. Again, I
Hmm.
was very much focused on what I had to do and what I wanted to do, not what someone else wanted me to do.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that was something that I had. So when I mean, it was terrible to see people both in the business. We're talking the music side of the music business side of it, do as much as the musicians did.
Yeah.
I mean, or more actually in some respects. But
Yeah.
no, it was I was never tempted at all to by peer pressure to to partake in their lifestyle, if you like, because I knew it was a steep slope and one that could easily you know make you something that you didn't want to be.
Well, obviously it produced excellence in your music. It produced excellence in your the administrative side of the business, and it produced excellence in your family, obviously. So that's uh, that's a lot to be proud of there, Derek. It really is. Um, uh, Gradually getting into the other parts of your career here, how do you view the prog rock scene today compared to the Gentle Giant days and how you guys did it? What's the best and worst that you see of it today? And or do you look at it and go, gosh, if we were starting Gentle Giant today, we would this is what we would do differently.
Well, the prog rock scene, I mean, there's really well, there's still a prog rock scene, but it's very everything's a niche right now. In the music world. I mean, as far as a live band is concerned. Um, uh, if we were going today, I don't know what I'm not even sure if we get anyone to see us because there are so many there are so many parts of the jigsaw puzzle to get your face out there and your music heard that it's a tough it's a very very tough way to make a living these days to be a musician. However, that being said, um, you know, I'm going to say this. I had no choice. It was in my DNA to be a musician. Even if we were lucky, even if we did a gig and we had enough money to pay for the gas and put bread on the table, that was enough. And that was true for everything I did. Just to make a living doing something you love to do and that's just and able to feed your family. And if you did a little more that helped you get a place to live which was yours, then even better. Um, but today's world is unfortunately um, very difficult actually. I think for the younger kids, it's very very it's all about TikTok and it's all about fame. It's all about fortune. It's all about being seen on the internet, and that's not the real world. They're living
Yeah.
in look, I'm an old guy, and I can say that, but it's and the AI now and all the other anime things. They're interesting to watch and see, but boy, this is not a person to person thing. I mean, we're speaking virtually, but we're in
Yeah.
person. I go to see people, and when you're on stage, you have people that are actually physically there, and they can physically, and if it was today, I'm not even sure we'd get on first base. To be honest.
Boy, isn't that the truth? I mean, I remember one of my first interviews I did after I launched Boomerocity was with Sam Andrew of Big Brother and the Holding Company. And it was up in Northern California. He said, Randy, keep in mind, when we were starting this, we were creating this, we were inventing it. And now there's schools that crank out 500 kids a year that can do Hendrix better than Hendrix, and that kind of thing. So there's this, it's almost become almost over commoditized, too many choices to pick from. And like you said, it's extremely difficult for anybody to get attention. It's, yeah, the tools are there that makes it easier to create, but then all just by virtue of economics, it also makes it much more plentiful, much more commoditized, much more disposable, and again, hard to get attention.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the well, getting attention is all about you know having likes and having views, and it's not about that. As far as music is concerned, you talk about being a band and being a prog rock band. It's about having real fans who love your music live, and you being able to play really well together live, and seeing the fans enjoy themselves, and them telling other people in person what this band was about, not on
Yeah.
Facebook, not on TikTok or Snapchat or wherever, the Instagram, etc. That's the only way that's the only way that a band, no matter who you are, can ultimately break through.
Yeah.
Even today, and it's much harder, of course, but that is the only way. The virtual thing or the online stuff, yes, it can help these artists become famous, but famous doesn't mean longevity or legacy or something that you'll look back on and say,
Or income even.
income as well. That's correct, exactly
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to get more into the business of the business here in a moment, but in your book, you mentioned three people, one of which I actually interviewed before he died. Um, or you mentioned two groups and a person, and they've all, in recent days have passed. You mentioned the Beach Boys. Of course, we just lost Brian Wilson, which he was, by the way, my shortest interview ever, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I'll tell you about that in a minute. I'd still laugh about it. Then, of course, you guys were close to Black Sabbath. Then you mentioned Terry Reid in your book too. All three of people, Avi died, Brian died, Terry died. What are your thoughts about them? It seems like they all kind of died relatively close together. What comes to mind about them? Because were they gone by the time had you already finished the book before these three passed away?
Um, no, I think well, Brian Wilson had died. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd finished the book, but certainly no Terry Reid and Ozzy. It was just very recently. So
yeah,
no, and it's very very sad because well certainly with Ozzy, I mean it was incredibly sad, but he didn't help himself, to be perfectly honest, with his lifestyle. What can I say? I mean, we loved the guys. I mean, we toured with them. We saw, it was a lot. It was there were funny stories, but ultimately, there are stories which again that which end up badly in certain ways. Ozzy, for instance, and poor Brian. I mean, he was what a songwriter he was. I mean, God only knows what is probably one of my top 10 favorite tracks ever. But that was many years ago, when we first started, we toured with the Beach Boys, and we just loved their music, but they weren't able to get their backing musicians over to England. This is back in when, and so they had to play themselves. And
whoa,
uh, just to say that they were less than perfect would be an understatement. Um,
yeah,
and that was a real surprise to us because we loved the music, but boy, they weren't that good when they're playing live just themselves without backing musicians. At the same time, they weren't very nice people.
yeah,
Then they were, we were just the lowliest on the bill. Actually, Terry Reid was on that same bill. He was singing with the group called Peter J and the Jaywalkers. Terry became a friend after that bill. This is way back in the 60s. He was a fantastic singer and a great guy. But they were unpleasant to everyone. We were just a lowly little band just turning professional. We wanted to say we love your album, and then shut the door in the dressing room and said we don't want to speak to you guys.
wow.
Yeah, it was
That's
unusual.
well,
But
and not.
one other band that did that was the Eagles did that to us as
I was
well.
just getting ready to mention that. You mentioned them too. In fact, I'm going to see Don Felder Friday night. I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and I'm going to be meeting backstage with him. But he seems pretty cool. But
Yeah,
from everything I've read about the other guys, I mean, it's like, whoa, I don't know if I want to talk to those guys or not.
I think it maybe changed, or we I don't know what it was, but for whatever reason they really were unpleasant. It wasn't just to us, but they were unpleasant to anyone on that bill, and they just it was weird because every other show and every other place we played and every other band we played with, we always try to get on, and and generally we would with everyone. But those
Hmm.
the Beach Boys, that was like way back in the day, and I could understand they were probably frustrated that they weren't playing with their their musicians, and I don't think they were having a good time anyway. But the Eagles
Yeah.
was a whole different thing. They just it took they decided to tell us we weren't very good. Okay, what can I say? All right, well, that's your opinion. No problem.
Yeah.
But
Gosh. And just even reading about the infighting amongst themselves, that's disappointing as well about how they were. I mean, I've heard that from other sources and such, of course. But somebody you mentioned in the book, and I was surprised because I interviewed this guy. I don't know. I've been doing this. I'm in my 17th year, so it's probably been 15 years ago. I should have looked it up to see when it was. but I was stunned that you mentioned not only mentioned him, but you mentioned him quite a bit. That was Tony Bon Jovi. And I was like, God, whoever talks about him? And I interviewed the guy because when he came out with this real time sound processor, it's an app that you can listen to music and it can make an AM radio sound like, Bose speakers and such. And so to hear your story about, of course, I didn't know you had anything to do with Bon Jovi the band until I read your book, and that was uh, that was pretty heavy duty. And then see how John and Richie have kind of gone their separate ways and such. What what are you surprised about how that band progressed, I guess, or or digressed or something, whatever you want to call it.
What do you mean, the Ritchie thing or the band itself?
Yeah, yeah, well, both basically.
Well, yeah, and with the band when I signed them, when I signed John and the band, I knew, well, and I knew John had this word it. We went through a process. He had the song "Runaway," and I signed him from that, and he put the band together, and Richie was joining. But I sat down with him. I went to meet his mom and dad in Sayreville, New Jersey, and they said look after him, which I did. But I remember sitting down with him, it's like it was yesterday. And I sat down with him, and he was 18, I think, and I was a little older. Um, and I said, John, how far and what do you want? What do you want out of this business? What do you want to be? And he looked at me in the eye and said, I want to be as big or bigger than Elvis. And you see that and hear it, and you think, am I hearing it right, or am I hearing what he wants me to hear? But in his eyes and his demeanor, he meant it. He was that driven to be as big or bigger than Elvis. And I knew then that he had that, whatever it is, to make it as where he ultimately made it. And then of course on the third album I got him together with Desmond Child. We went to Vancouver, and Slippery When Wet became like number one
Huge.
in 20 weeks and sold like 20 million records. So he knew then what he was saying to me then was getting close to being almost true in 1986, 87.
Wow. I know when I interviewed Tony, the publicist told me, she said, whatever you do, don't bring up John
Well,
Bon Jovi.
Tony it was a different
and,
story.
and she kind of touched on it, but then you kind of filled in the gaps there in your book.
Tony effectively had a deal with John.
Yeah.
He signed a deal that whatever John recorded at the power station, which Tony owned at that time,
Mhm.
he he had a piece of him, and a big piece too. I mean,
Very big, yeah.
and he when we signed, we didn't realize that Tony had signed John and Bon Jovi, and it could have been a big lawsuit. Ultimately, we had our business affairs and work out the deal where he got he had points from the first album and the second album, thankfully for John, not the third album. But yeah, Tony did invest his time and his studio to John while he was trying to be what Bon Jovi became. In all fairness, Tony was he developed him in certain respects. So I have to
Yeah.
give props to Tony to a certain degree, but nevertheless, I mean, it was a bad deal for John, and thankfully we came out of it. And John made a killing on the third album and continued to be from New Jersey, from Slippery When Wet to New Jersey, and being who he is now, which is great actually,
Yeah.
because he's become uh, and he is a really great human being and someone who really cares about other people, which is
Yeah.
I'm really heartened by what he's doing now.
I've read about that. That's seems very genuine compared to other people who seems to be just doing things for the optics.
No, he's genuine, absolutely genuine about it, and I'm really happy that that he turned out the way he did.
Yeah. One thing I've got a comment about you. You in the book, as I was reading, I was kind of wincing at some stuff because you didn't mince words about people. You pretty much call things as they were, whether it's former band members or even the dynamic between you and your brothers, or you know, like we were just discussing with Tony. I would imagine some people, number one, don't always particularly like that because they don't like the truth sometimes. And then secondly, I have to ask, have you gotten any blowback from how matter of fact you've been about the facts of as you recall them for your book?
Um, no, actually, because
Cool.
truth. I mean, blowback. Look, there's truth is it's not particularly comfortable, but nevertheless, if truth is truth,
True.
it's not just making up stories for the hell of it. These things that my rivalry with my brother Phil. I mean, that was, it was always there. And I honestly, I had, when I first got the first advance copy of the book, I sent it to him. I said, and I said, read it. And I called him afterwards, and Phil didn't come back with, oh, you should have done that. You should. He knew that, I was telling what I was saying was, there was no issue about saying something that wasn't true. In fact, I mean, there were
Right.
things left out, which were better than and to talk about other people that you mentioned, the Beach Boys and or the Eagles or whatever. No, the book is not actually out yet, so I'm still waiting for some blowback. But nevertheless, if it wasn't if these weren't facts, then I yes, I would expect some blowback. But they're real. I mean, I don't mind telling the truth about myself, which I've done, but I don't mind
Right.
telling the truth about other things that I was involved in, and no one can say that they didn't happen because they did.
That's true. Another band you mentioned, I was surprised to hear that you were involved with, and I guess my way of phrasing it is you had a lot to do with keeping them from going downhill, if not actually helping them resuscitate their popularity. And that's AC/DC. And you mentioned Chris Slade in there. I interviewed him, I guess it's been a couple years ago. I don't know if you knew this, but he played drums for Tom Jones
Yeah.
and turned down the gig for Elvis.
Oh, that I didn't know.
That
That I
Yeah,
didn't know.
he told me that himself. It's on the video, and he of course when he turned it down, Ronnie Tutt got the gig. But what tell viewers your piece about the about AC/DC, or at least enough to whet their appetite to get them and want to buy your book.
Yeah, well, AC/DC were, excuse me, on Atlantic Records for most of their career. And I came in, I was running Atco Records, which is a part of Warner Music Group. And the head of Atlantic, a guy called Doug Morris, um, we're all in a room together, and they had a pretty big deal. And he said to me and told a few other people that he was thinking of dropping AC/DC because the two albums that were prior to when I got involved with were not selling very well. And in fact, they weren't very good. And he was going to drop them. And I said, you can't drop AC. What do the AC/DC is AC/DC. And I said, here's what I'll do. I've inherited a couple of bands, having coming into this company, Atco Records. Um, I'll trade you Stevie Nicks, which, and I'll take on AC/DC. And he said, deal. Okay. So I met with the managers of AC/DC at the time, and I knew that AC/DC were very, very insular and didn't want anything to do with record companies. They were really like, stay away from us because we don't like the record business at all, which is still the case. However, I was lucky enough to have been in two bands, as you mentioned before. And their brother George, who was in England, was in a group called the Easy Bees. And he knew my history and said, "Oh, isn't that Derek Shulman who was in Simon Dupree?" Oh, and I guess Angus or Malcolm said, yeah, that's the same guy, I think. And he said, that's cool. You can trust him. So they kind of opened the door a little bit to me, and so I got together with them, and I said to Malcolm and Angus, and I realized that the band AC/DC was really the heart of the band was honestly not Angus and Brian, it was Malcolm. Malcolm was the soul of the band. So I said, look, here's, now you're on the label, and I would love you to come all the way back. So I basically got involved with them and heard some demos, and I reached out to my favorite like producers, if you like. It was Bruce Fairbairn and Bob Rock in Vancouver, and said, how would you like to produce the new AC/DC album? And they said, sure, we'd love to, of course. So we went up to Vancouver, and it was actually one of the easiest processes that they've ever had. The prior one were not very easy, apparently, and I was allowed in the studio. That was something that would never happen in the Atlantic, and heard what was going on. And I thought, boy, this is much more what I really hoped for with AC/DC. Anyway, the album was done. It was called The Razor's Edge. We put out Thunderstruck, and
Boom.
they were back. So I was really happy that I was able to, take on and be part of the reinvention of the of the quintessential rock band out there.
Yeah. Wow. You seem to have had your fingerprint on some major events in the business there. What's in your opinion from the time you started with Simon Dupree and then Gentle Giant and then segued to the dark side of the business of making music? What's been the best and worst changes you've seen in the business? What do you think's been great as far as change, and what do you think has been the absolute worst things that's happened to the music business?
Great. Let me think what's great about it. Oh, I'll tell you, I do know what's great, and it's also the worst. The internet on both sides, and the availability and the of anything that you can do and everything that you can do. For whatever reason, Gentle Giant has become even more popular today in certain respects with a younger generation who could look back and look at YouTube videos and hear our remixes and aspire to be musicians. And it's amazing that there's an audience out there that still want to play and be great players and take and see what our band did in the 1970s and play their music like we did. And that's something which is great because I think that is it's about music. It's about playing your instrument. It's about really, being a musician and taking it to the limit as well as you can. And then hopefully you take it on stage and hopefully you'll get an audience and hopefully you can make a living at it. That's been a great thing that's been happening over the last 20 years. And in fact, just as a reference point, during COVID, my son put together a video of the fans playing our music as a song called Proclamation. And it got millions of views, and these fans literally played every instrument. And my brother Ray, who passed away a couple of years ago, did the audio for it, and it became an event of the year in prog rock and everything else. And these are musicians who are young kids and playing our parts, which is very difficult. So that's the best thing. And at the same time, the worst thing to happen is the internet and the availability of people thinking they're musicians and people thinking they're stars and thinking that fame and fortune and having the availability of AI and doing something which is really not creative, really not theirs, um, is something that and is something that they deserve to be and something they deserve to make a living at. That's something that irritates me a lot. Just the fact that someone the younger generation, to a certain degree, are a little bit entitled. They feel entitled that they should make a
Just a
living.
little bit.
Well, I'm trying to be very diplomatic here. Um, and whereas, and that's the thing that the internet has, and all these other things that have driven the business, if you like, music business, is a sense of entitlement that they should be famous, they should be rich, and just because they've done something on the internet. Whereas when we started, we just wanted to make music and hopefully make a living at it. And that was these two things have really kind of like hit each other head on. And I don't quite understand what it is. I hope that it's that ultimately, as I said, the first one where fans have looked at kids who pick up instruments and said, I could try that and really become really good at what they do, as opposed to having a computer do what they can do, will be the future. I don't know, or they'll become a combination of both. But so they're the best and worst that I can see as far as I'm concerned.
I to touch on what you're saying, I recently I want to be very veiled about this because I don't want to insult the person, but there's a young man who's phenomenal on the guitar, and I saw him open for a pretty big name. He opened not too far from here, and musicianship wise, the guy's as good as anybody you've ever heard. Put him up against Hendrix, name it. But he played covers the whole, almost his whole set. I mean, I think he had one or two originals that were okay, but I thought, that's really where it seems we're at now for for that younger generation. I mean, there's exceptions. Of course, you got people like Joe Bonamassa, who is a monster, and others. But you've some of these kids, as you said, I think we've raised a generation of, I'll just say it, narcissistic and entitled brats that don't want to put the effort in on anything, whether it's music or a career or anything else. That I here we thought we were doing them a favor, trying to make it easier than we had it or thought we had it. And we've created people that don't want to work hard. And that's, at least that's an observation I have.
Well, that's something that you asked me way at the beginning of this interview about why and how and everything how I came to write the book. And I worked my ass off, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you did.
I worked and worked and worked and put the blinkers on and said, I'm going to work my ass off to get where I have to go. Whether and if money and good health come into it, even better. But that's what I'm going to do, and put the time in to be as good as I can be, and whatever there's to create, as you said. As far as Gentle John was concerned, we didn't have any aspirations to be like someone. It was an open page, and we created something on that open page, and that's something like, but not have a computer do it. It was out of our heads and our fingers. And that's something that I wish that there was more of with the younger generation today.
I agree. I've got three more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I'll give you all three,
Oh,
and you can be as detailed, take as long as you want, or as little as you want to do it in whatever order you want to ask. So, question number one, and I could go in all sorts of directions with this. What are your views of AI and catalog sales? People selling off their catalogs for, huge amounts of money. What's on your radar for the rest of the year and going into next year? And how do you want to be remembered, and what do you hope your legacy is? Have at it.
okay. AI and catalog. Um, well, let's do catalog first. Well, if it wasn't for catalog and bands that made it during the period of time then we were in a band, the record companies, there's only three majors, Warner, Sony, and Universal. They wouldn't be in business. End of story. And why was that? Because the artists that the catalogs are all about were bands that played live and got an audience that were that were fans, real fans of a band that could actually play music and do what they did on record. Uh, Up until the 90s and aughts before the advent of the internet. I'm going to say something about the internet in a minute. But yes, that's where the catalog comes from. And why was it there? Because these artists were also artists that created. They didn't follow anyone. They created something which was theirs, and they were leaders in that world. However, on the other side of the fence, AI, it's an interesting part of the world that's going on. I'm in the middle right now of we've had our catalog remixed by Stephen Wilson for the most part, a lot of the catalog. There was one album which for whatever reason we weren't able to get hold of the multis, and I've been in the studio um, with the album is In a Glass House. Um,
You
and
mentioned this in the book, right?
at the very end,
Yeah,
it's at the very
yeah,
end,
yeah.
I'm still in the studio doing it. And there's this new level of AI where you can literally separate the tracks, not just the stems, the tracks, the drum, the kick drum, the snare, the
Wow.
hi-hat, front. I mean, it's just amazing what it can do. Um, and I'm in the middle of remixing In a Glass House using the highest level of AI. So I shouldn't, if I can't really uh, launch any kind of negativity on AI because it's helped me and us come back to that album and be able to remix it the way we should have done it. However, AI can be incredibly detrimental in being, but again, the reason why that AI for me is I'm not looking to do something that I haven't done. This is stuff that has already been mixed
Right.
and played. However, you can, ask AI to make an album like In a Glass House, and it can do that. But that's not creative. That's not you opening a page or thinking out loud and saying, okay, this comes from here, and rather than this. So the dangers of AI are, I mean, they're multi purpose and all over the place. I don't know where it's going to go, but and I won't be around when it finally lands of where it want to go. But I'm afraid of it, to be honest with you. Um,
I agree. And my concern is that the new owners of the old catalogs
oh,
feel, depending on how they're buying, how their contracts were. I know they're very creative on how these catalogs are being sold. There's limited, limitations, all that kind of stuff. But my long-term concern is somewhere down the road, like you said, after you and I both are gone, AI and those catalogs meet and, you know, a form of history being rewritten in a way that is a bit off track from what it really was. A total prostitution, if you will, of all of that. What I do hope, and I've mentioned it to other people, is that AI is used to better track royalties to be paid. Whether it's streaming royalties, radio play, which, radio's dying, but to be able to have almost like a Doge like effect that goes out and, has the umbilicals all over the place to track what's going on and then come back and pay artists and, copyright owners, whatever, all the different fingers in the till, if you will, pay more accurately and more judiciously, is what
yeah,
I hope.
yeah, no, I agree with you. But that's at the same time, you asked me about these big financial companies buying catalogs. Um, I understand from an artist point of view, they're cashing in, of course. That's exactly what they're doing. Um, I won't do that. We won't for Gentle Giant. We've been asked, and our music will belong to our kids, and hopefully, get for and further to wherever it goes, grandkids or wherever, and we won't do it. because it's what we did. I hope was something that was real, was something that that is boy, I'm trying to think of the word it is. It left something which I hope is a legacy of who we were, and I want to leave it untouched like that, because when we stopped at our zenith, if you like, to a certain degree, and left the music untouched, and the fact that people are still interested in it says a great deal about what this band meant. So to sell it to a financial house, or you're right, it could easily turn into this, morph into something which is whatever is going on today, the anime version of I can't remember what's the number one right now. This Korean, K-pop Demon Hunter. You know,
Yeah.
so
Something I can't even relate to,
nor me, but what? Obviously, it's relatable to some of the audience out there. But that's
Yeah.
again, that won't happen with Gentle Giant.
Very cool.
And I forget the last question. I'm sorry.
Radar, and how do you want to? What's on your radar for the rest of the year, and how do you want to be remembered, and what you hope your legacy is?
Well, I just mentioned the fact that that I'm in the process of finishing up the new version, the reimagined, if you like, a remixed version of In a Glass House for next year, and there's a couple of other ideas, but I'm old and I get tired easily, so
I can relate.
a little more rest, but to be remembered, that that music was my life. That's it.
Very cool. Well, Derek, this is a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I could go another hour or two with you easily, just drilling into the things about the music and all that. Because, like I said, I'm a business geek. I love learning and hearing what's going on there. And hey, when this re-engineered, remastered album comes out, maybe we can talk again and just focus right on that and help spur a few more sales that way as well.
I'd love to speak to you then. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Derek. Be safe. My best to you and your family, and hopefully we'll talk next year when that album comes out.
Absolutely, Gene. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise. Take care.
Bye-bye.
This has been another fun-filled episode of Boomerocity with your host and producer, Randy Patterson. The theme song is Roll the Dice and is recorded and used by permission from Quentin Hope. Quentin is spelled Quinten, and Hope is Hope. And you can find out more about Quentin at quentinhope.com. Post-production is done by Cardinal Sins Productions. The Boomerocity name, logo, and content is copyright protected. Segments may only be used with written permission by Boomerocity and/or its assignees. Inquiries should be directed to input@boomerocity.com. Copyright 2025.